History Zone, where the past comes alive.
We have to get out of here! The whole city is burning!
I remember that evening as if it were carved into my bones. A quiet, golden haze settling over Chicago, the city humming with the rhythm of ordinary life. It was October of 1871, the kind of dry autumn where every leaf seemed brittle, every wooden board groaning under the weight of the season. I walked along the streets near my small tenement, my boots echoing on cobblestone, the smell of coal smoke and horse dung clinging to the air. Gas lamps flickered weakly in the dying light, their soft glow casting long shadows across the sidewalks where children played and vendors shouted their wares. The city was alive, yet I sensed a tension underneath it all, a subtle unease that seemed to drift with the wind. People passed me in hurried clusters, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion from long days of labor in factories, workshops, and shipping yards along the river. The breeze carried the sharp tang of iron from the rail yards, mingling with the sweet aroma of baked bread from corner bakeries. Everything seemed normal, almost painfully normal, and yet I could not shake the feeling that something waited just beyond the edges of perception, like a predator crouching in the shadows. I paused by a horse-drawn wagon piled high with firewood, the driver swaying slightly on the narrow street. He tipped his hat to me, and for a brief moment our eyes met, both of us aware of the suffocating drought that had gripped the city for weeks. Fires had broken out here and there, nothing major, just small blazes in alleyways, quickly stamped out by volunteer brigades. But the tinder dry air made every spark a threat. I remembered hearing whispers from neighbors about the dryness, about the wind, about how it carried embers farther than anyone thought possible. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but my stomach clenched anyway. The streets were a patchwork of contrasts, elegant brick buildings alongside fragile wooden shacks, each one crowded with families, their lives stacked precariously atop one another. I could see smoke curling lazily from chimneys, children leaning from windows, their laughter drifting above the hum of carts and footsteps. A man sold roasted chestnuts, and the scent mingled with the acrid tang of the tannery down the block. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool autumn air fill my lungs, unaware that it might be the last calm breath I would take for a very long time. As I walked, I noticed small signs, the things most people might miss if they were preoccupied. A loose board on a storefront fluttering in the wind, sparks from a chimney flickering upward and disappearing before they should. A stray cat darting across the street, its fur singed along the edges as if it had brushed too close to some unseen flame. My chest tightened. There was an energy in the city that night, a strange electricity that felt wrong, like the quiet before a storm too terrible to imagine. I reached the corner of DeKoven and Jefferson, where the O'Leary barn stood. It was an ordinary structure, weathered wood, a modest stable for a few cows and a cart. I paused, my gaze lingering on its darkened silhouette. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, so subtle I might have imagined it. My instincts told me to hurry past, but I could not. Something drew my eyes to the barn, something primal, an unease I could neither name nor dismiss. And yet, for all the signs, the city slept. Families sat down for dinner, men laughed in taverns, and the flickering gas lamps continued their quiet vigil. Nobody could know what was coming. Nobody could know that the ordinary night I walked through, the simple, comforting sounds of footsteps on cobblestone and the soft neighing of horses, was about to be consumed by a fire so fierce it would erase everything we thought we knew about Chicago. I took one last look at the horizon, the sky fading to a bruised violet as the sun dipped behind the factories. Somewhere in the distance, a single ember flickered in the wind. It danced for a moment and disappeared, and I wondered then, innocently, if it meant anything at all. It did. It meant everything. Little did I know, I was walking into a night that would change the city, the lives of thousands, and mine forever. And it began, quietly, unnoticed, in a place as ordinary as any other.
I had barely taken a few steps past the O'Leary barn when I smelled it, an acrid, biting scent that didn't belong to the usual city smoke. It clawed at my throat, sharp and unnatural. I turned my head instinctively, eyes scanning the darkening streets. At first, I saw nothing but the ordinary shadows of a late autumn evening, the silhouettes of tenements and warehouses stretching long across the cobblestones. But then, a flicker caught my eye, a thin orange tongue dancing against the barn's weathered siding. My stomach dropped. At first, it seemed almost insignificant, as though the barn itself had merely caught a stray reflection of the setting sun. But then the light wavered, grew, and began to lick the edges of the dry wood. Sparks shot upward into the wind like startled fireflies, each one hissing as it disappeared into the darkness. The wind was rising, whispering against the eaves, and the sparks seemed to ride it, landing on nearby fences, on hay piles, on the wooden sidewalks. I felt a sudden jolt of panic, a deep primal warning that this was no ordinary fire. I rushed closer, my boots pounding on the uneven cobblestones, and I saw a woman shrieking from a nearby window, her hands pressed to her cheeks. "Fire! Fire!" she cried, her voice high and panicked, echoing against the buildings. Behind her, I could see other neighbors beginning to stir, their movements frantic, disorganized. Some carried buckets of water, but I knew it would be useless. I'd seen small fires before. I knew how fast a dry barn could turn into an inferno. But this felt alive, insatiable. The flames grew hungrily, climbing the barn walls with almost deliberate speed. I could hear the crackle and pop of the wood giving way, a sound both mesmerizing and terrifying. The wind carried it like a siren song, and before I realized it, the fire had caught the roof. It arced upward in a blaze that seemed to reach for the sky, throwing a molten glow across the streets. The shadows of people moving in panic were stretched and warped against the facades of nearby buildings. I could hear horses whinnying, their fear spilling into the chaos, wheels of carts squealing as drivers tried to flee. Instinct took over. My heart hammered in my chest, and my mind narrowed to one singular focus: survive, and survive others if I could. I grabbed the arm of a man frozen in disbelief, dragging him away from the flickering edge of danger. His eyes were wide, glassy with shock, but he followed, stumbling behind me. The smell of smoke was overwhelming now, thick and choking, curling into my nose and mouth. I coughed violently, the acrid taste of burning wood filling my mouth. Each breath burned my lungs. Each step felt heavier as the fire began to assert its presence, not just on the barn, but on everything around it. People screamed, calling for loved ones, banging on doors, kicking at windows, but the chaos was unstoppable. The fire leapt from building to building, carried on the wings of the wind, its hunger insatiable. Sparks rained down like a fiery snow, igniting crates, shutters, and dry brush along the streets. I saw a child frozen near the curb, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face, staring at the flames as if hypnotized. I scooped her up, feeling her small body tremble in my arms, and ran. My survival instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. Every alley, every doorway became a potential death trap. I dodged falling beams, sidestepped flaming barrels, and twisted around panicked neighbors who had lost all sense of direction. The fire's roar was deafening now, a living thing that seemed to consume sound itself, replacing it with an endless crackling rage. And all the while, my eyes kept flicking to the horizon, scanning for a path to safety, a place where the fire's reach might falter, if only for a moment. And yet, even as the chaos consumed the streets, a part of me couldn't look away. The fire was terrifying, yes, but beautiful in its own cruel way, an unnatural dance of heat and light that reflected against the cobblestones, glinting in the terrified eyes of the people running past me. I knew, with a clarity I could not shake, that nothing in this city, nothing we had built, would be safe tonight. And that realization, cold and undeniable, settled deep in my bones. Survival would not be enough. We had to fight, to move, to keep hope alive against a fire that threatened to erase everything. I ran then, carrying the child, weaving through alleys, over debris, my lungs burning and my heart hammering, knowing the night had only just begun and that the first sparks were all we would ever see of what was coming.
The fire was no longer a single blaze. It had become a living, breathing entity, consuming everything in its path. By the time I reached the next block, the O'Leary barn was little more than a skeleton of blackened beams, the flames having leaped across the wind-whipped streets to buildings beyond. Windows exploded in showers of glass, and the roar of the inferno rolled like thunder through the streets. People were everywhere, running in every direction, and yet, despite the chaos, each of us was singular in our fear, alone in the heart of the blaze. I stumbled over a fallen wagon wheel, my lungs burning from the smoke, and caught myself against a fence. Flames licked its sides, curling toward the street like hungry fingers. Behind me, a man tripped and fell, his face smeared with soot and panic. I grabbed his arm and pulled him upright, ignoring the intense heat that made the air shimmer. He thanked me in a voice barely audible over the crackle of fire and the screams of those fleeing. Around us, the city's wooden skeleton was giving way, collapsing with explosive crashes, sending splinters and embers into the night sky. The streets themselves had become an obstacle course of destruction. Horses bolted, carts overturned, and the clamor of panic filled every corner. I could see entire storefronts engulfed, their facades melting in the heat, flames curling through signs and awnings, sending sparks flying onto the streets below. One building's roof collapsed just a few feet from where I ran, throwing a wave of fire in all directions. I dove to the ground, feeling the heat scorch my clothes, and crawled to the relative safety of a side alley. Even in the madness, I couldn't ignore the human suffering. A mother screamed for her children, searching desperately through the smoke and flame. I spotted her little boy pinned beneath a fallen beam, his face streaked with ash, eyes wide of terror. Without thinking, I ran to him, lifting the beam just enough to free him. He clung to me as we bolted through the street, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck. Behind us, the fire roared, a living wall that consumed everything in its path, indifferent to human cries or courage. I pressed on, navigating streets that were barely recognizable. Buildings were burning in chains, fire jumping across rooftops, and the wind drove it onward with merciless force. I could feel the heat on my back, smell the acrid smoke filling my lungs, and hear the panicked cries of neighbors lost in the chaos. Each step was a decision between life and death, a gamble against the fire's unpredictable hunger. Around me, people were improvising, forming desperate human chains to carry buckets of water, to pull someone from the rubble, but it was futile. The flames had the city in their grip. Even as we fled, there were glimpses of humanity fighting back. A man threw himself onto a fire to save a trapped dog, carrying it to safety before turning to continue his flight. A neighbor grabbed an elderly woman, her legs too weak to run, and carried her on his back. Amid the destruction, these acts of courage were small beacons, fragile against the consuming darkness, yet they mattered. They reminded us that survival wasn't only about fleeing, but about holding on to our humanity, even as the city burned around us.
The fire had transformed familiar streets into a nightmarish maze. Alleyways I had walked 1,000 times seemed alien and hostile. Smoke thickened to the point where it burned my eyes and obscured my path. I coughed violently, choking on the heat and the ash that rained down like fiery snow. Yet I pressed on, feeling the boy in my arms shaking, knowing that if I faltered for even a moment, we could be swallowed by the inferno. And then I saw it, a bridge of embers across the street, ignited by sparks carried by the wind. My heart leapt into my throat. To go around it would mean doubling back through more flames. To go straight would be to risk everything. Instinct surged. I ran, lungs screaming, adrenaline sharpening my senses, and leapt across the burning wooden boards. The heat singed my coat, sparks rained down on us, but we landed on the other side. The boy clung tighter, terrified, and I whispered words I'd barely believed myself. We will survive. We have to survive. The streets were no longer streets, they were rivers of fire, a citywide furnace with every corner hiding a new threat. And yet, in the chaos, one truth became painfully clear. We could not outrun the fire forever. Survival meant moving forward, thinking fast, and holding on to whatever fragments of courage we could. Every step was measured against destruction, every breath against the choking smoke. Every glance at the fire reminded me this night would leave nothing untouched, and only those who fought, who ran, who acted with desperate courage would live to tell its story.
The fire had transformed Chicago into something unrecognizable, a nightmare stitched together from smoke, flames, and the cries of terrified people. Streets that had once been familiar were now narrow corridors of chaos, littered with burning debris and collapsing timbers. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The smoke was thick and suffocating, curling into my lungs, burning my eyes, and coating every surface with a gritty ash. Every breath felt like swallowing fire, every step a gamble against the unpredictable collapse of the city around me. I stumbled down a narrow alley, clutching the boy to my chest. His small body trembled, and I whispered words I barely felt, trying to calm him, trying to convince myself as well. We will get out of this. We have to get out of this. The alley was a trap in every sense. Fallen beams blocked the way, embers clung to the wooden walls, and smoke swirled in suffocating eddies. A shutter fell from a building above, narrowly missing me, and I leapt aside, heart pounding. Survival was no longer a choice. It was the only thing that mattered. All around me, people were scrambling for escape. A young woman crawled over the charred remains of a cart, clutching a bundle of cloth that I assumed was her child. A man dragged an unconscious neighbor across the alley, sweat and soot streaking his face as he fought against the heat. It was chaos in its purest form, every instinct honed for survival, yet every human act a testament to courage. Even in the smoke and fire, people were reaching for one another, risking themselves to save those who could not flee alone. I came across a woman pinned beneath a fallen beam, her legs trapped and her eyes wide with panic. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees and heaved the beam just enough for her to crawl free. She scrambled past me, stumbling into the smoke, muttering prayers of gratitude. The boy clung tighter to my shoulder, his small arms tightening as if afraid to let go of the only thing keeping him grounded in this madness. I could taste the ash in my mouth, feel the heat of the flames on my neck, and hear the distant roar of the fire devouring blocks around us. The alley opened into a wider street, and the scale of the destruction became clearer. Buildings were ablaze on both sides, their wooden frames crackling and collapsing, showers of sparks raining down like fiery hail. I could see shadows moving through the smoke, some running, some frozen in fear, some desperate to pull others from the wreckage. The air was thick, heavy, almost tangible, and each step felt like moving through a furnace. I could feel the heat pressing in from every side, forcing me forward, driving me toward the river, toward safety. The boy whimpered, fear etched across his soot-streaked face. I tried to steady him, whispering reassurances even as doubt gnawed at me. We are going to make it. We have to make it. The smoke was choking now, curling into my lungs with every breath. My eyes burned, watering so much I could barely see.
I felt the panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to focus, to scan every step, every shadow, every possible route through the inferno. Instinct sharpened everything, my hearing, my vision, my sense of danger. One wrong move, one misjudged step, and it would be over. And then I saw it, another path, a narrow alley leading toward the river. The smoke was lighter there, thinning ever so slightly. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered with caution. Flames licked the edges of the alley entrance, and I had to time every step perfectly to avoid sparks that shot out like arrows. I darted forward, feeling the heat on my back, smelling the acrid tang of burning wood and melting tar, feeling the boy clutching me as tightly as if he could somehow anchor himself against the chaos. We ran, slipping over rubble and sidestepping glowing embers until the alley opened onto a street that led directly toward the river. The roar of the fire was deafening now, but for the first time I could see the silver glint of water in the distance, shimmering through the smoke and firelight. It was salvation, fragile and distant, but real. I pressed the boy closer to me and ran, ignoring the pain in my lungs, ignoring the screams behind us, focused entirely on the river and the fragile hope it offered. Even in that moment, I knew survival would not come easily. The smoke, the fire, and the chaos would not relent. Every step was a battle against both the inferno outside and the fear inside. And yet the thought of the river, of escape, of living to tell the story, kept me moving. Through the smoke and fire, through terror and exhaustion, I ran. I ran for the boy, for myself, and for anyone who might have a chance to survive this night of unrelenting flames.
The river shimmered in the distance, a ribbon of silver cutting through the night like a promise of life. I could see it faintly through the thick smoke, the glow of the fire reflecting off its surface in fractured, molten patterns. For a moment, the inferno seemed almost beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful in the way destruction often is when seen from the edge of survival. Flames licked the skyline behind us, towering over buildings, turning the night into a furnace of orange and red. And yet here, at the river's edge, there was a fragile glimmer of hope. I sprinted across the street, clutching the boy tighter to my chest. The fire was relentless behind us, consuming everything in its path with a hungry, unyielding roar. Wooden facades buckled and collapsed. Sparks rained down in showers that made my skin prickle with pain. Each step closer to the river was a battle against the heat, the smoke, and the panic threatening to swallow us whole. Around me, people fled in every direction, some screaming, some silent with shock, some carrying what little they could save. We reached the water's edge, and I gasped for breath, finally able to draw a somewhat cleaner inhale. The river was a surreal sight, reflecting the flames like a mirror made of fire. Buildings burned along the opposite bank, their skeletal frames glowing, collapsing in bursts of sparks and embers. People clung to makeshift rafts, boats, and logs, their faces illuminated by the inferno as they pushed away from the bank in desperate flight. I spotted a man helping an elderly woman into a small rowboat, his arms straining with the weight, but his determination unwavering. Heroism flickered in this chaos, fragile yet undeniable. The boy in my arms shivered, and I tried to calm him. "We're safe now," I whispered, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. The flames behind us roared like a living beast, relentless and merciless. And yet here, on the riverbank, I felt the first taste of relief since the fire began. I lowered the boy to the water's edge, and he clung to my leg, eyes wide, ash streaking his cheeks. The cool touch of the river against our skin was a balm against the burning heat of the city, a temporary reprieve from the inferno that threatened to erase everything we had known. I glanced back at the city and felt a wave of disbelief. The streets we had just run through, the buildings I had walked past countless times were gone. Flames consumed them with a ferocity I had never imagined. Roofs collapsed, walls crumbled, and the fire leapt from one structure to the next, as if alive, as if it had a purpose beyond mere destruction. The screams of those still trapped behind the fire reached us faintly, carried by the wind, and I felt a pang of helplessness. Survival came at a price,
and that price was the lives of those who could not escape. We stepped carefully into the water, the boy gripping my hand as we waded into the cold, murky water. The current tugged at us gently, carrying us slowly downstream, away from the flames. Around us, others floated, some on logs, some clinging to debris, some helping each other. I spotted a man helping an elderly woman into a small rowboat, his arms straining with the weight, but his determination unwavering. Heroism flickered in this chaos, fragile yet undeniable. As we drifted, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The fire had consumed so much, yet here on this river there was still life. Every movement mattered, every hand extended mattered, every small act of courage mattered. I held the boy close, watching the reflection of the fire ripple across the water's surface, and I understood, perhaps for the first time that night, that survival was not only about escaping the flames, it was about holding on to hope, to humanity, and to one another. The fire behind us continued to roar, an endless chorus of destruction, but the river carried us forward, a slow, unyielding promise that life could persist even in the face of annihilation. We moved together, each stroke of our hands against the water, a defiance against the inferno, a refusal to be swallowed by fear. And in that moment, as the fire blazed and the river flowed, I felt the first spark of hope amid the nightmare, the knowledge that perhaps we would live to see the dawn.
The river had carried us away from the worst of the flames, but safety was fleeting. We reached the opposite bank to find a cityscape unrecognizable. Streets lined with the skeletal remains of buildings, their walls blackened, windows shattered, roofs collapsed. Smoke still hung thick in the air, drifting like a shroud over the city, carrying with it the stench of burned wood, melted tar, and charred memories. The boy clung to my hand, his small fingers numb from the cold water, and I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me heavier than the fire itself. We wandered through the ruins, searching for shelter. Some buildings were still too hot, their wooden frames glowing ominously. Others had partially collapsed, leaving jagged debris that threatened to impale anyone who stepped too close. Every step required caution, every movement calculated. It was a city that had been alive just hours ago, full of life, and now it was a graveyard of charred timbers and twisted iron. I felt a hollow ache as I passed homes I had known, imagining the families that had lived there, wondering if they had made it out. Finally, we stumbled upon a church, its stone walls scarred but standing, its doors open wide as if inviting us in. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of wet wool, but it was dry, protected, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. Others had gathered here as well, men, women, children, faces streaked with ash, eyes wide with disbelief. Some were crying openly, others sat silently, shock etched into every line of their faces. The walls were lined with makeshift bedding, coats and crates, anything that could offer comfort. It was rudimentary, but it was shelter. I set the boy down on a bundle of cloth and knelt beside him, checking for injuries. He was exhausted, soot covering every inch of his skin, his eyes red from smoke and fear. I brushed a strand of hair from his face and whispered, "We're safe for now. We're going to rest, and then we'll see what comes next." He nodded weakly, trusting me with a faith I was determined not to betray. Around us, the murmurs of the other survivors created a strange, fragile rhythm, a heartbeat of life amid destruction. Outside, the city continued to burn in patches. The wind had shifted, and distant flames still illuminated the skyline, throwing long, flickering shadows into the church. People spoke in hushed tones of what had been lost, their homes, their businesses, their neighbors. I listened as families recounted stories of separation, of children carried to safety, of friends who had vanished in the smoke. The fire had spared few, yet the stories of survival began to emerge, glimmers of hope amidst the grief.
I helped a man bandage a deep cut on his arm, the edge of a falling shutter having caught him as he fled. Nearby, a woman tried to soothe a group of frightened children, singing softly, her voice trembling against the cries and sobs around her. Each act, each small gesture of humanity seemed monumental in the shadow of such overwhelming loss. It was a reminder that even when the city itself had been erased, the spirit of its people remained unbroken. Night fell fully, and the church became a haven, a temporary island of warmth and light amid the devastation outside. Fires still raged in pockets of the city, and the distant glow of the inferno reminded us all that this disaster was not yet over. Yet inside these walls, we shared food, blankets, and stories of survival. People comforted each other, held hands, and offered quiet words of reassurance. The collective determination to endure, to survive, became almost tangible, a force as real as the flames that had threatened to consume us. I sat for a moment, leaning against the stone wall, the boy asleep in my lap. My body ached from the exertion of fleeing, from the adrenaline that still coursed through my veins. And yet, amid the exhaustion and despair, I felt something else. Hope. Not the naive hope of dreams, but the hard, stubborn hope of survival. We had lost so much, but we were still alive, still capable of moving forward. And in that fragile hope, I realized something essential. The fire had destroyed buildings, it had claimed possessions, it had erased streets, but it could not destroy the will to survive, the instinct to care for one another, or the strength to rebuild. For tonight, the church was our refuge, and tomorrow we would step back into the ruins and find our way through the ashes.
The fire had scorched the city, but it had also revealed something else, humanity in its rawest, most stubborn form. As I moved among the survivors in the makeshift refuge of the church, I saw grief, yes, but I also saw courage. It was a quiet courage at first, subtle and fragile, almost drowned out by the cries and whispers of loss, yet unmistakable. Every face bore the marks of the night's horror, yet in the eyes of some, I saw determination flickering like a stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. A man knelt beside a collapsed wall outside the church, lifting rubble from a trapped child. His hands were black with soot, his coat scorched, but he refused to stop until the boy could crawl free. When the child finally wobbled to safety, the man's shoulders sagged, and he smiled briefly before disappearing back into the shadows of ruin. I watched this act and realized that heroism didn't always roar. It sometimes whispered, performed quietly in the midst of chaos. Near the riverbank, another story unfolded. A woman had seen her neighbor, an elderly man, stranded atop a crumbling balcony as flames consumed the building below. Without hesitation, she grabbed a rope, tied it around her waist, and climbed toward him, the heat pressing in from every side. I couldn't watch her without my chest tightening. Every second seemed like it could be the last. But she reached him, held him close, and guided him down to safety. People around us clapped softly, not in celebration, but in recognition of the bravery it took to risk everything for another. The boy in my arms stirred, frightened by the noises outside, and I held him close, whispering, "See, there is still good in this world. People fight to survive, yes, but they fight for each other too." He nodded sleepily, soot still streaking his cheeks, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Around us, the church hummed with quiet murmurs, people sharing stories of loved ones rescued, neighbors who had carried one another through the flames, strangers who had offered hands and blankets. I found myself listening to a young man recount how he had carried a dog through a wall of smoke, refusing to leave it behind.
The flames were closing in on him, and he had risked his life again and again, crawling over burning debris, ignoring the pain in his arms and lungs. "I couldn't leave him," the man said simply, his voice raw but steady. "Not him, not any of them." It struck me then how thin the line between life and death had become, and how the choices we made in those moments defined not just survival, but character. Loss, of course, was everywhere. Families mourned children who hadn't made it. Husbands searched desperately for wives, friends for friends. I saw a woman kneeling over a pile of ash, weeping for a neighbor she had tried to save but could not reach in time. Her cries echoed through the stone walls of the church, a reminder that courage and grief often coexist in the same breath. And yet, even in the face of such loss, people continued to help one another. Where despair might have paralyzed them, determination took root, guiding hands, steadying hearts, and keeping the fragile spark of hope alive. I moved among them, offering what I could: water, blankets, comfort, words. Every story I heard, every act of heroism I witnessed, etched itself into my mind. These were the moments that would define the city long after the fire faded into memory, proof that even in the face of unimaginable destruction, the human spirit persists. Outside, the night was quieter than before, but the glow of distant fires still painted the horizon. Survivors ventured out cautiously, helping others to safer ground, dragging what little they could salvage from the ruins. And inside the church, those of us who had escaped the immediate inferno began to understand a fundamental truth. Survival was not just about escaping death, it was about preserving humanity, about standing for each other when the world had been reduced to flames and ash. I looked at the boy, now dozing on a bundle of cloth, soot-covered but alive, and I understood what mattered most. Buildings could burn, streets could vanish, lives could be lost. But the acts of bravery, the hands that reached out in darkness, the courage to care for another, these were unbreakable. And that night, amidst smoke, ash, and grief, the stories of loss and heroism became our armor, our light in the shadows, and our guide toward whatever dawn awaited us.
Even after we found shelter, the fire did not leave me. It followed me into the church, into the fragile quiet of the night, into the darkness that should have been safe. Sleep came in fits, broken by the crackling of imagined flames, by the scent of smoke that seemed to cling to my skin even as I washed it away. Every time my eyes closed, I was back on the streets, running through walls of fire, clutching the boy, feeling the heat sear the air around me. I was haunted not by the fire itself, but by the helpless faces of those who could not escape. I jolted awake again and again, sweat soaking my shirt, the boy stirring beside me. He whimpered softly, and I stroked his hair, trying to soothe him even as my own chest heaved with the memory of the inferno. The city outside was silent for the moment, the distant glow of burning ruins fading to a dim ember in the night. But inside my mind, the fire raged unchecked. I could see the buildings collapsing, hear the glass shattering, smell the acrid smoke, feel the heat pressing against my back as if it were reaching for me still. I began to understand a terrible truth. Surviving the fire was only half the battle. The other half was surviving the memory of it. Each image was burned into my mind like a brand. The mother screaming for her children, the man dragging his neighbor through rubble, the little boy I had carried running blindly through the smoke. Sleep offered no mercy. It only replayed the horror in vivid detail, each nightmare more suffocating than the last.
Sometimes in the pitch black of the church, I would see shadows of the flames dancing on the walls, remnants of the fire reflected in every flicker of candlelight. I would hear the echoes of screams, even though the city outside was quiet. My hands trembled without warning, my chest tightened, and I felt the heat all over again. The small boy's hand would find mine, and I would ground myself, reminding both of us that we were alive, that we had survived, but the memory clawed at me relentlessly. I began to drift through the church in those sleepless hours, walking among the other survivors, seeing their exhaustion mirrored in my own reflection. Faces blackened by soot, eyes hollow with shock, children who trembled in the arms of strangers, adults who whispered prayers and lamentations under their breath. Each person carried a story, a nightmare, a piece of horror that the fire had given them. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was resilience, quiet, stubborn resilience that refused to be extinguished. The fire had taken much, but it had also revealed the strength of those who endured. I saw a man quietly tending to a child with a minor burn, his hands shaking but steady. I saw a woman distributing blankets and water, her face lined with soot but firm with determination. Even in our shared trauma, we found ways to protect each other, to comfort, to endure. These acts became anchors, fragile but essential, keeping our sanity tethered as we faced the aftermath of destruction. I could not escape my own mind, though. Every creaking floorboard, every gust of wind rattling the windows set my nerves on edge. Each distant shout reminded me of screams I had heard through smoke-choked streets. My dreams were haunted by fire, by smoke, by the knowledge that death had been just a heartbeat away for so many. I realized that survival would demand more than physical endurance. It would demand that I confront the nightmares, that I carry the memory without letting it consume me. And so I stayed awake most of the night, sitting beside the boy, watching the shadows, listening to the quiet hum of other survivors breathing, whispering, mourning. The fire outside had begun to die down, but inside it would take longer to fade. I promised myself I would carry the memory with purpose, not as a torment, but as a reminder of what we had endured, what we had survived. Each flicker of flame in my mind became a lesson, each scream a reminder that courage and compassion could exist even in the darkest inferno. By the time dawn approached, I felt a fragile sense of resolution. The nightmares would come again, surely, but I was not alone. We had survived, and in that survival lay the seed of hope. The first glimmer of strength to face the day, to face the ruins, and to rebuild what had been taken from us. The fire had burned the city, but it had also revealed the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be defeated, and that spirit, I knew, would guide us through the ashes. Dawn broke slowly over the city, casting a pale, smoky light across streets lined with blackened timbers and rubble. The fire had died down in most places, leaving a city stripped bare, skeletal, unrecognizable. Yet as I stepped out of the church with the boy by my side, I noticed a new kind of energy stirring among the survivors, a fragile, determined pulse that refused to be extinguished. It was the first real sign that hope could survive even the fiercest fire. People emerged cautiously from their shelters, blinking against the early light and surveying the ruins. Faces streaked with ash and soot turned toward one another, searching for family, friends, neighbors. Children held tightly to the hands of adults, trembling from exhaustion and fear. Yet they moved forward, propelled by instinct and necessity. We were all broken in some way, yet the instinct to rebuild, to help, to endure had begun to take root. I helped carry the boy across a street littered with splintered boards and charred bricks. Around us, neighbors pulled debris from collapsed structures, salvaging what they could: buckets, blankets, crates of food, even fragments of furniture. The fire had stolen homes, businesses, and memories, yet the people's resolve remained. Dawn broke slowly over the city, casting a pale, smoky light across streets lined with blackened timbers and rubble. The fire had died down in most places, leaving a city stripped bare, skeletal, unrecognizable. Yet as I stepped out of the church with the boy by my side, I noticed a new kind of energy stirring among the survivors, a fragile, determined pulse that refused to be extinguished. It was the first real sign that hope could survive even the fiercest fire. People emerged cautiously from their shelters, blinking against the early light and surveying the ruins. Faces streaked with ash and soot turned toward one another, searching for family, friends, neighbors. Children held tightly to the hands of adults, trembling from exhaustion and fear. Yet they moved forward, propelled by instinct and necessity. We were all broken in some way, yet the instinct to rebuild, to help, to endure had begun to take root. I helped carry the boy across a street littered with splintered boards and charred bricks. Around us, neighbors pulled debris from collapsed structures, salvaging what they could: buckets, blankets, crates of food, even fragments of furniture. The fire had stolen homes, businesses, and memories, yet the people's resolve remained unbroken. Every rescued object, every recovered piece of the past felt like a small victory, proof that life could continue amid destruction. Near the riverbank, a group of men worked together to move a fallen cart, its wheels still glowing from embers. Women and older children gathered supplies, distributing blankets, water, and whatever food they could scavenge. I joined them, feeling a sense of purpose replace the lingering exhaustion and grief. Each task, no matter how small, became a step toward reclaiming a life that the fire had tried to erase. I saw acts of courage once again, though of a different kind than during the fire. A man rescued a small dog trapped under a collapsed fence, holding it against his chest as he carried it to safety. Nearby, two women helped a blind man navigate the broken streets, their hands steady on his shoulders. The night had revealed the extremes of human vulnerability, but the day revealed our capacity for resilience. The fire had tested us, and now we were learning to stand in its wake. I looked at the boy as he began to explore cautiously, picking up small charred pieces of wood and examining them with curiosity rather than fear. He had survived, and for him, the world had begun anew. I realized that this rebuilding was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a reclamation of agency after a night of terror. Every hand offered, every smile shared, every whispered word of encouragement became a brick in the foundation of hope. We moved toward what had once been a bustling street, now a ribbon of ashes and ruin. Neighbors formed informal chains to clear debris, guiding children, assisting the elderly, and salvaging personal items. The city, though decimated, was not dead. It was alive, in the determination of its people, in the quiet but persistent hum of survival. I felt a profound respect for the ordinary courage of those around me, the courage to continue, to care, to rebuild. Amid the ruins, I noticed the first signs of community forming again. Makeshift shelters were erected from salvaged planks and tents. Fires for cooking were lit carefully, their smoke rising gently rather than raging unchecked. Conversations began to flow, sometimes soft and tentative, sometimes filled with laughter that startled me and delighted me. The survivors, battered but unbroken, were reclaiming the nightmarish landscape as their own. I paused on a street corner and watched the sun rise fully, casting long shadows across blackened buildings, the reflection of hope glimmering in the soot-streaked faces of the people around me. I realized that while the fire had erased much, it could not erase the spirit of a city or its inhabitants. Every act of courage, every gesture of kindness, every determined step forward was proof that Chicago could and would rise from the ashes. The boy tugged at my hand, and I knelt to his level. "See?" I whispered, pointing to neighbors working together, laughing softly as they cleared debris. "We can rebuild. We can survive. We will survive." His eyes, wide and earnest, reflected both fear and hope. In that moment, I understood something essential. The fire had been a test of destruction, but also a test of resilience, and we were passing it, slowly, together.
Of the acts I had witnessed, small, quiet, yet monumental in their impact. The man lifting the fallen beam to save a child, the woman rescuing a neighbor from a crumbling balcony, the countless strangers who reached out to help one another, even when their own lives were in jeopardy. These were the true monuments left by the fire, invisible yet enduring. They were a testament that life, even when threatened with obliteration, carries the capacity for compassion, courage, and hope. The boy tugged at my hand again, pointing to a small flame still flickering stubbornly on a rooftop across the street. "Will it hurt anything else?" he asked, his voice tentative. I shook my head. "No," I said, "it's nearly gone. The fire has done what it wanted. Now it's up to us." His eyes reflected a mixture of relief and curiosity, and I realized that this was the moment he would remember. The first day after the fire, when the ruins seemed endless, yet survival was real, tangible, and shared. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smoky, acrid air, and exhaled slowly. The city smelled of ash and charred wood, but also of life persisting, of water from the river, of earth trampled but enduring, of people refusing to surrender. I placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll rebuild," I said, and this time my voice carried conviction, a certainty born from the night we had endured. Brick by brick, heart by heart, we will make this city alive again. And as we walked through the streets, helping others wherever we could, I understood something profound. The fire had erased homes, livelihoods, and memories. It had tested our courage, stripped us to the barest essentials of survival, and forced us to confront fear and loss in its rawest form. Yet it had also revealed the strength of humanity, the stubborn, unbreakable will to endure, to protect, to rebuild. This was the city's true flame, and it would never be extinguished. I looked down at the boy, asleep in my arms now, soot-covered but alive. I realized that this fire, though terrifying and destructive, had forged something stronger than mere survival. It had forged hope. It had forged courage. It had forged a new beginning. And in the reflection of the flames that still lingered in pockets across the city, I saw not just destruction, but the promise of life reborn from the ashes. Chicago had burned, yes, but we had survived. And survival, in its purest form, was more than living through the fire. It was carrying its lessons forward, standing amid the ruins, and walking resolutely toward the future. That future, I knew, would be built by hands that refused to tremble, hearts that refused to break, and spirits that refused to yield.
Of the acts I had witnessed, small, quiet, yet monumental in their impact, the man lifting the fallen beam to save a child, the woman rescuing a neighbor from a crumbling balcony, the countless strangers who reached out to help one another even when their own lives were in jeopardy. These were the true monuments left by the fire, invisible yet enduring. They were a testament that life, even when threatened with obliteration, carries the capacity for compassion, courage, and hope. The boy tugged at my hand again, pointing to a small flame still flickering stubbornly on a rooftop across the street. "Will it hurt anything else?" he asked, his voice tentative. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It's nearly gone. The fire has done what it wanted. Now it's up to us." His eyes reflected a mixture of relief and curiosity, and I realized that this was the moment he would remember, the first day after the fire, when the ruins seemed endless, yet survival was real, tangible, and shared. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smoky, acrid air, and exhaled slowly. The city smelled of ash and charred wood, but also of life persisting, of water from the river, of earth trampled but enduring, of people refusing to surrender. I placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll rebuild," I said, and this time my voice carried conviction, a certainty born from the night we had endured. Brick by brick, heart by heart, we will make this city alive again. And as we walked through the streets, helping others wherever we could, I understood something profound. The fire had erased homes, livelihoods, and memories. It had tested our courage, stripped us to the barest essentials of survival, and forced us to confront fear and loss in its rawest form. Yet it had also revealed the strength of humanity, the stubborn, unbreakable will to endure, to protect, to rebuild. This was the city's true flame, and it would never be extinguished. I looked down at the boy, asleep in my arms now, soot-covered but alive. I realized that this fire, though terrifying and destructive, had forged something stronger than mere survival. It had forged hope. It had forged courage. It had forged a new beginning. And in the reflection of the flames that still lingered in pockets across the city, I saw not just destruction, but the promise of life reborn from the ashes. Chicago had burned, yes, but we had survived. And survival, in its purest form, was more than living through the fire. It was carrying its lessons forward, standing amid the ruins, and walking resolutely toward the future. That future, I knew, would be built by hands that refused to tremble, hearts that refused to break, and spirits that refused to yield.